It appeared to be nothing more than a formal portrait of a mother and her daughters, clear as throat, but if you focused on their hands, something felt different. Dr. James Mitchell had spent over 15 years studying photographic archives at the New York Historical Society, yet he had never encountered anything quite like this. The image had surfaced in a donation box from a Brooklyn estate sale, dozens of fragile glass plate negatives wrapped in brittle newspaper dated 1923. Most were ordinary for their time. Stern merchants posed wedding parties, children dressed neatly in their Sunday best, but one photograph made him stop. 3 women looked out from the past. A mother, perhaps around 40, sat centered in an ornate wooden chair. Her daughters, likely in their late teens or early 20s, stood on either side. All 3 were African American, dressed elegantly in high-collared gowns adorned with detailed lace, their hair carefully styled. The painted studio backdrop depicted a garden scene typical of that era. What caught James's attention wasn't their composed expressions or the formal arrangement, it was their hands. The mother's hands rested in her lap, fingers interlocked in an unusual formation. Her right thumb crossed deliberately over her left, while her index and middle fingers extended and the others curled inward. Each daughter placed a hand gently on her shoulders, their fingers arranged in similarly precise, intentional positions. James had reviewed thousands of Victorian-era portraits. Subjects usually kept their hands relaxed or resting naturally. Photographers demanded stillness due to long exposure times, and every detail had purpose. These gestures felt too exact to be accidental. He lifted a magnifying glass and examined the negative more closely. In the bottom corner, faintly etched into the glass, were tiny numbers, NY892247. That evening, back in his Upper West Side apartment, James spread his research materials across his dining table. He had digitized the glass negative in high resolution, and now the portrait filled his laptop screen in striking detail. The clarity was extraordinary for 1892, the texture of the fabric, the brooch on the mother's collar, subtle differences in the daughters' faces. But again, his attention returned to their hands. He zoomed in until each finger dominated the screen. The positioning was unmistakably deliberate. This wasn't random. The mother's thumb crossing over the other required conscious effort to maintain during exposure. The daughter's mirrored variations confirmed a pattern, angles, placements, all intentional. James had studied Civil War imagery, Reconstruction records, and early 20th century reform movements. He knew that hidden communication systems often existed, visual signals embedded in posture, objects, even subtle gestures. He opened his database on abolitionist and post-emancipation networks. The Underground Railroad had used quilts, songs, coded symbols, but this was decades later. Why would coded communication still be necessary? His phone buzzed. Dr. Sarah Chen, a colleague specializing in African American history, had replied, "Free tomorrow morning, what did you find?" James responded quickly, "Something that might change how we understand post-Reconstruction activism in New York. Bring your materials on property rights and documentation." Sarah arrived promptly the next morning, carrying a worn leather satchel filled with papers. The portrait was projected large across the research room wall. The 3 women seemed to watch them. "Look at their hands," James said, pointing. Sarah stepped closer, studying carefully. After Reconstruction collapsed in 1877, she began setting her documents down. Black families in the North faced a different kind of struggle, not slavery but systemic exclusion. She spread out legal records, clippings, and court documents. Property rights, inheritance, identity all became tools used against them. Many had no official records, no birth certificates, no marriage licenses. James picked up a newspaper from 1891. The headline read, "Property Dispute in Harlem, Family Claims Ownership Without Documentation." Exactly, Sarah continued. Communities formed mutual aid networks. They shared resources, hired lawyers, built their own systems of verification. "Secret networks," James said quietly. "Parallel networks," she corrected, operating alongside official systems, using methods authorities didn't recognize. James looked back at the portrait. What if this isn't just a photograph? What if it's documentation? The etched number led to a breakthrough. After searching directories, James traced it to a photographer named Thomas Wright, whose studio operated between 1888 and 1896 on 8th Avenue. The building still stood. Research into Wright revealed something unusual. A white photographer from Massachusetts, he openly welcomed black clients at equal rates, rare for the time. His advertisements even appear. Read in African American newspapers. In an 1894 interview, he spoke about photography as a tool for dignity and identity. He was more than a photographer, Sarah said. He was an ally. James nodded, and if these hand positions are codes, he may have helped design them. They brought in Dr. Marcus Thompson, a historian of cryptographic systems. He examined the image carefully. Victorian codes were practical, Marcus explained. If this is a system, it likely conveys categories, not letters. He traced the hand positions digitally. Each gesture could represent status, family role, identity verification. Sarah leaned in. These networks needed to confirm who belonged, who could be trusted. As they compared additional photographs from the same collection, patterns emerged. Couples, individuals, families, all with subtle, deliberate hand configurations. This is a system, Marcus concluded, multiple signals combined to carry meaning. Then Sarah uncovered the final piece. Court records from the 1890s revealed a lawyer, Robert Hayes, who consistently won property cases for black families. He frequently used photographic portraits as evidence. He wasn't just showing identity, James realized. He was presenting encoded proof of community standing. In archived letters, Hayes described a photographic documentation system. One letter from 1893 read, "The hand positioning allows essential information to be encoded and later verified." James leaned back stunned. They built their own identification system. "And hid it in plain sight," Sarah added. Determined to identify the women, James traced the estate records to a Brooklyn home. The owner, Patricia Johnson, confirmed their identities. "My great-grandmother," she said softly, "Elena Morrison, the daughters were Ruth and Grace." Elena had been born enslaved in Virginia and moved north after the war. She worked as a seamstress, known for intricate lacework. James paused before asking, did she ever mention being part of a network or community organization? "She was active in her church," Patricia said softly, "and she helped people. That's what my grandmother always told me." Elena helped families with paperwork, finding homes, connecting them with lawyers. She seemed to know everyone, how to work through every system. James felt his pulse quicken. "Patricia, I believe your great-grandmother was part of something much larger, a network that helped African-American families establish identity and protect their rights after Reconstruction." There was a pause. When Patricia spoke again, her voice carried emotion. "I always knew she was special, but we lost so much history. After she passed in 1919, the family scattered. My grandmother rarely spoke about those early years." With Patricia's permission, James and Sarah began mapping Elena Morrison's connections. Records from Bethel Church in Brooklyn confirmed her membership from 1879 until her death. She was listed as part of the Ladies' Aid Society, officially responsible for charitable work. But deeper examination of meeting notes revealed something more organized. The society maintained detailed records of the families they assisted, names, ages, situations, needs. Yet scattered among those entries were strange notations, numbers and letter combinations that seemed meaningless at first glance. Until Sarah noticed the pattern. "They're cross-referencing," she said. "The church identified families needing documentation. Wright photographed them using the hand codes. Hayes presented those images in court, and the church tracked everything hidden inside routine charity records." James searched further into Wright's archive. The Historical Society had acquired his full collection decades earlier, but it had never been thoroughly catalogued. Dozens of portraits revealed the same hand positioning system. Families photographed between 1890 and 1896, each image carefully numbered, each one quietly documenting individuals excluded from official systems. They uncovered more members of the network. A teacher named Samuel Brooks who helped secure school records, a city clerk named Mary Chen who ensured property documents were filed correctly, a minister, Reverend James Washington, who performed marriages and issued certificates when others refused. Each had taken risks. Each had worked within a system designed to deny access and found ways to bend it toward justice. Together, they created something powerful, a hidden archive that preserved identity, dignity, and protection when official structures failed. 3 months into their research, James and Sarah organized an exhibition at the Historical Society. 20 portraits from Wright's collection were displayed, each featuring the coded hand positions and accompanied by the stories behind them. Patricia Johnson attended. For the first time, she saw her great-grandmother's portrait recognized and honored. She brought her daughter and granddaughter, 4 generations standing together before the image that had begun everything. But the most powerful moment came when other descendants arrived. James and Sarah had traced families connected to 12 of the portraits. Each brought fragments, stories, letters, documents that suddenly fit together within the network's framework. An elderly man named Thomas Hayes stood before a photograph of his great-grandfather, the lawyer Robert Hayes. His hands were posed in the same deliberate code. "I always knew he helped people," Thomas said quietly, "but I never understood how much. I never realized it was part of something this organized." A woman named Grace Brooks studied the portrait of Samuel Brooks. "My family said he was arrested in 1895 for helping someone obtain false documents," she said, "but now I don't think they were false. I think he was helping people get what they were always entitled to but denied." The New York Times covered the exhibition with the headline, "Hidden in Plain Sight: How Post-Reconstruction Activists Built a Secret Documentation Network." Within days, historians from across the country reached out. Similar networks had existed in Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago, parallel systems using coded photographs to help African American families navigate exclusion and secure their rights. 6 months after discovering the original portrait, James stood in the conservation lab, carefully handling the glass plate negative. Dozens of rights photographs had now been restored, preserved, and made accessible to descendants and researchers. The portrait of the mother and daughters had become iconic, featured in textbooks, documentaries, and museum exhibits, but for James, its meaning remained deeply personal. He thought of Elena Morrison, born into slavery, who built a life of purpose in New York, who helped countless families navigate injustice, who posed for that photograph with her daughters, their hands forming a code meant to endure. Patricia later donated Elena's personal papers, letters, a diary, records from her seamstress work. In her diary, Elena had written, "Had our portrait taken today, Mr. Wright is kind, he understands what we are building. The girls were nervous, but I told them this picture will matter. One day, people will see what we did here." She had been right. The photograph had mattered. It preserved not only their likeness, but their resistance, their creativity, their refusal to disappear. Sarah eventually traced 63 families connected to the network, documenting how they secured property deeds, marriages, business licenses, and school records, rights that should have been guaranteed, but instead required ingenuity and quiet defiance. The network operated roughly between 1888 and 1897, helping hundreds before gradually fading as members passed away, relocated, or adapted to new systems. Thomas Wright died in 1923, his role largely forgotten. Robert Hayes practiced law until 1910. Elena Morrison lived long enough to see her daughters settled, her work carried forward by others. The network didn't end in justice, but it created real pathways for survival and dignity. James now met regularly with descendants, collecting stories and reconnecting families linked by this hidden history. The portrait had become more than evidence, it was a bridge across generations, proof that their ancestors had been resourceful, connected, and determined. He often thought about Elena's hands, carefully arranged in that Brooklyn studio in 1892, forming a message that would outlive her, carrying her story forward across more than a century. In the end, the smallest details held the deepest truths. Sometimes all it takes is looking closely enough to see.